Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Papa Van and this is number 32 of the CK3 Dev Diaries. Today we're going to be talking about going medieval on audio, and before we jump into the Dev Diary, I want to highlight why I think that a Dev Diary like this one, although of course it is not needed to understand what CK3 as a game is, I think a Dev Diary like this one is one of the most important ones, because sound is something that is under-discussed and underrated in, any modern form of media, be that TV, be that shows, be that movies, or be that video games. And at the end of the day, I think that what we are seeing in this Dev Diary is an interesting illumination of something that otherwise for the consumer is very, very dark. Now, before we do anything about that, let's just listen to this. This is one of the favorite songs of all time, out of all Paradox interactive songs that I've ever listened to. I hope that you can hear it. I think you can. This is what blasts into your ears when you open Hearts of Iron 2. And I'm going to make it a bit louder here, forgive me for that. There we go. That blasts into your ears, that makes you feel like a general, that gives you the dignity but also the responsibility in that war, and already sets the mood, that, gives you the immersion that it wants to give you. And that is a goal, of course, that every single video game soundtrack has, but in this case, this is Hearts of Iron 2 Doomsday, a game from 2004. Of course, Andreas Waldertoft also involved back in the day. With this, he has been the in-house composer for Paradox Development Studio for almost 2 decades, maybe even 2 decades. I wouldn't know, honestly. I, of course, sadly, have never met him. I didn't meet him at PDXCon 2019, which I would have loved, because I have listened to his works for such a long time. But the interesting thing about this is that I completely adore what you just listened to. That really sets the mood for me. But I couldn't really tell you why. I can tell you it sounds epic, it sounds magnanimous, it sounds huge, it sounds like there's a lot of dignity and responsibility going on, and it's a tough time, but you're gonna get through it, that sort of stuff. But I can't actually tell you what makes it sound like that. What exactly inspires those feelings? And I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, definitely let me know in the comments, but I feel as though that is something, the angle of why does it do this is very much underexplained and understood. I mean, that doesn't really make sense, but it's underexplained, and I can't articulate properly why that is. Now, in visual design, I can always, for example, look at the Crusader Kings portraits, and I can say I like this, I don't like that, this looks like a potato, this looks like a real person. I can tell you why, because the potato clearly, has a face that isn't really modeled the way that I imagine a human being to be modeled. Maybe they look a bit, out of it, maybe their eyes are a bit off, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of things where we can pinpoint why we feel a certain way, whether we feel immersed or not immersed about something when it comes to visual cues. Now, when it comes to audio cues, it's a lot harder. And what I find interesting is that they present us here with how they designed this music, making it so that maybe we get a bit of a bigger understanding of why we feel a certain way about sounds that we will encounter in CK3. So, this is going to be a very interesting one. Let's just jump into it. This one is written by Björn Iversen, and then later on it's written by Andreas Waldertoft himself, the man, the legend. And hopefully just, the start of decades of legendary music composers in the music industry. I mean, he's one of many, of course. There are so many other, I don't want to talk any of that away. So many great music decisions made in video gaming these days. And essentially today we're going to talk about the audio vision first, and then we're going to talk, or rather listen to a lot of video sound samples here for CK3. So, what was the audio vision? They started by doing something that they didn't do earlier. They essentially started to loop audio into Crusader Kings III much earlier into development. CK2 was developed before my time as audio director, and during those days the studio did not have any dedicated sound designers that helped them with the game audio. So, essentially, while the game was being created, they already filled in the sounds. They already tried to create an, audio vision that matched whatever the gameplay and whatever the visual vision already was. And I think that is really nice, because that puts a huge impact on just how in general the game feels when it is developed as a unit instead of, first step, second step, third step. First, Andreas Waldertoft, our in-house composer and close co-worker, and I could, in the early stages of design work, on what we wanted to do with the soundtrack. I think settle to something this is a bit of a phrasing, but don't worry about it. This meant that we could work more on certain aspects that I felt were a bit lackluster in Crusader Kings 2, and the 3 main pillars for me were storytelling. So, as an example, we have added sound effects to the event backgrounds to enhance the immersion of the event. For instance, if it takes place in a courtyard, it should sound like it. My goal is that it's not only the sound design that should enhance the immersion storytelling, but also have the music to help with that. A bit more about music later in the diary. Then the second pillar is the map should feel alive. Essentially, they added more and more sounds and noises that you hear when you are on the map, but I don't need to explain that. We're going to listen to that in a second. And then a more calm soundscape. Now this might sound a bit too abstract, but hear me out. One of the main issues with the previous title was also how unfortunately every single audio and music asset wanted to play loud and all at the same time. Another one of our main goals was to have a much better soundscape in which no sound effects are competing with each other too much for a place in the mix, and that the music isn't too intrusive for the player experience. Basically, we wanted the game to sound more calm, which is more pleasing to the ears after long gaming sessions. I mean, the first two should be apparent at all times, right? We can understand what exactly they mean when enhancing storytelling, making it as though you are the character. When, I think, for example, at the art design dev diary, they had a pilgrimage event there. And essentially your character was standing in a field, and that visually makes you feel as though you are with your character in that field. And now they are adding the sounds in a way that makes it so that not just visually do you get that cue, but it is combined with the audio. That is very obvious, I think. The map feeling alive, we already have a very basic version of that in CK2, but a more calm soundscape. I think that is something that grand strategy game in particular have completely underused so far, and that's just because it's new tech to a certain degree. To essentially create a fully rounded artistic product is new tech. It's very difficult. I think games like God of War do it very, very well, where essentially, and Last of Us of course as well, where essentially music and sounds are used to be contextual. At all times they are contextual. CK2 and other grand strategy games already are semi-contextual. Some music plays during war, some music plays during peace. Other music or other sound effects happen whenever an event happens. For example, when you get married in CK2, there is a sound. It's a very like a somewhat aggressive sound. When you have a trade post, every single monthly tick, you will hear a coin toss, that sort of stuff. There are definitely a lot of audio cues in CK2 and other grand strategy games that already do this, but they don't do it with the design goal and with the actual coordination that we will see right here in CK3. So let's get into the sound design. Let's get into the, event theme essentially here, which is the first video right here. The event theme as we call them, and there are different ones depending on the event. Also then, Art made these beautiful backgrounds for the event, so we wanted to enhance them by adding ambience sound. Here's an example of marriage event with these two elements. And now let's just listen in. I hope that this is loud enough, but I think it will be. Right, so essentially what I want to point out is here, you can hear the wind, which is of course something we already know from CK2. Then you hear the bell, and then you see an event picture that has you in front of a fireplace, and it is about a wedding, meaning a mass event. And all of a sudden the wind goes back into the background. You can now hear the bell that introduces us. The bell is fairly soft, fairly somber. Honestly, I'm not sure about the bell event sound yet, but maybe that's just getting used to it. But what you hear then is that the wind goes away and you are with your character in this room. You can hear the fire and you can hear the people in the background because of course this is a very busy occasion. You're being celebrated, there is a marriage. And there you go. What I like about the CK2 sound of clicking, and this is completely, it's very small of course, but I really like how precise it is. It is one sound, it doesn't stay for too long, it doesn't linger, it just makes it so click. I know it's very, very minor, but I really, really appreciate that detail. You hear the click and then it's gone. And that is only one of the things that impact the event. The other thing here is essentially the music. Let's listen into that. So right here you can see that there was music playing in the background, and then as the event came up, that track faded out and the current track faded in. Now if you combine these two elements, you get this. You can hear the music change, the fireplace comes up, the wind goes away. And doesn't this just feel like a new era, a new chapter of your character's life has begun with a marriage? Marriage is something so trivial in Crusader Kings because you will do it so often. But this marriage, to me, is the first time that I don't just click away with it. Instead, you see these two characters that are now bound together, probably for life, whenever that ends. And they actually connected it with with an audio thing that complements the visuals, but also in its own, honestly, has its own life. The music tells its own story. And here we are back again to the point where I can't explain why the music does that. I guess it's, because they put so much thought into creating the sound and then creating the music and doing the way from the normal music to the new music for the particular event. Let's just listen to that again. But in detail, I can't really explain it to you. But man, this is such a different thing. It really sets the mood. You know, it really sets the idea that this is how things are going on. This is the current chapter of your character. I appreciate that so much more than Crusader Kings 2. And by the way, I don't want to, I don't mean to rib on CK2, but for the longest time, and this is just how game design tech worked back in the day, I call it tech, right? But what I mean is, when you design new things, especially in the creative branch, that was the correct term, you will always have to try new things that haven't been tried before, that are completely nonsensical until you see them work. And I think this is one of those things. Crusader Kings 2 essentially just plays a playlist. Now, it is somewhat context sensitive. Again, you know, what plays at war, what plays at peace, but it never does anything as sophisticated as this one. So when I say CK2 doesn't do that, I don't mean to rib on CK2. It took CK2 for the game branch and for this game to get to this incredibly sophisticated point. I love that. I love that we have come to a point where essentially there are so many different factors going into a single event that is literally just you marrying, which you will do over and over and over again in CK3, as we of course did it in CK2, because it's a very normal event. I love this sophisticated idea behind it. It's just like so well tempered. Now let's move on and go to declaring war, because we are declaring war here, and let's just take a look at this. Seize the Earldom of Desmond. It is just a single county war. And now listen to this. The horn was blown, and the music is the most epic music. Could be played as the armies of Isengard march towards Rohan to destroy the forces of the horse riders. I love it. I do. I really love it. And by the way, look at Glitterhoof down there. Arrows, 835. Let's just enjoy the music here a bit longer. I hope this doesn't get copyright strike. I would understand it, but like, I hope it doesn't. We'll see about it. Either way. You can hear this music right here, and what really fascinates me about this is that it makes a tiny war sound absolutely epic. It just goes all in. When you declare the war, of course, on the grand scale of things, I mean, conquering a county isn't that magnificent, there isn't that much involved in doing that, but for your character, for the region your character lives in, this means a huge change to how life works. It means a huge change to the challenges now opposing your character. So the way I see it, having something this epic is something never seen before in Crusader Kings 2. You just didn't get this atmosphere. Listen to this music. It's incredible to me. I also like the horn blown, you know, the sword clashing as this pops up here. I love this combination between audio and visual cues. Now, with the, you know, basic event music essentially behind us, let's just move towards Ambience, because Ambience, we talked about this earlier, of course CK2 already has this, but CK3 goes a bit of a step further. It also does, you know, more regionalized ambience, it does ambience more fittingly, and it tries to do ambience in a way that is less intrusive, but still reminds you that there are people living on this map, that there are people going, you know, and trying to follow through on their desires, on their ambitions, on their dreams and hopes. And all of that is happening in the everyday life to life in England. Let's listen in. Let's see the... I love this map, by the way. Like, this actually looks perfectly fine. You know, City Sprawl, I'm of course a big fan, but I think this looks quite alright. You can hear some dogs, you know, you can hear the water, you can see this ship over there, look at that. Interesting. This, I think, this particular sound or set of sounds is the closest that exists to what we have in CK2, because something like that, essentially what I would describe as a busy marketplace or semi-busy marketplace, maybe a marketplace in the morning, that is already in CK2, but this one is a bit less intrusive, which I always liked, because whenever you zoomed in, you would just be ambushed with all of these different sounds coming at you, and then you open the intrigue video and all of this intrigue window, and all of a sudden all of these whispers would be there. Like, there was so much noise in CK2, and CK3 just gets rid of that and transforms it into something less intrusive. Now let's listen to the Nile River, shall we? And let's look at the map while we do it. Look at the pyramids, all those mosques everywhere. You can hear the atmosphere is a bit different. Can't quite place the sounds, I'll be honest with you. Like, what exactly we're listening to. Is it horses? I think we're listening to horses every now and again, right? But either way. So this is a very subtle, non-intrusive, and yet ever-present sound effect. Let's do the last one, India. I think this one is the most intrusive, although I'm not sure intrusive in this case means, you know, aggressive. It's just the most noticeable. Let's listen in. There we go, there's the intrusive sound. And even then, it's very calm. Oh, very loud. Maybe it's not that calm. Yeah, this is like the most intrusive, but I wouldn't describe it as intrusive per se, right? But this is essentially India. So you have all of these different soundscapes, and I'm really hopeful that long term the game can become more granular, you know, like, so example, there's a different sound than in England and in comparison to Ireland, in England in comparison to France. I assume right now there is essentially Western Europe, right? It's just the general medieval market feeling. And that is fine, but I hope long term that we see a similar development between this, but also the visual art design. So for example, you know, if you pre-order CK3, you get more clothes for your characters, and I hope that effectively you will get something similar in terms of the development, not necessarily the pricing model. I don't really care for that. That's something that we have to see when it comes to it, but a further development of sounds is something that I would love for CK3. Now, let's move on to music. Andreas Waldetoft, as I said earlier, one of the absolute legends that definitely created a lot of music that I am very fond of and have memories of. And they designed the music, of course, in the similar way where it has to fit the game, but they designed it in a greater way than they ever did before. We ever wanted a soundtrack that would have much more depth and the sort of sounds one can expect to hear. For example, we have recorded many different medieval instruments. Examples are bagpipes, hurdy-gurdy, keyed fiddles, stringed instruments, and many different percussion instruments, to name a few. We also used a full orchestra, solo vocalists, and church choirs. Look at this good stuff right here. It's so nice to see the backdrop of this, you know, to see how they do it, how much work goes into a single soundtrack of a game. And now what they have is cue tracks and mood music. And this is something, again, that we already saw in action up above, but, you know, that is completely new to Grand Strategy, I think, at least to the degree that they're doing it here. The cue tracks are often shorter pieces of music that reacts to events happening in the game. So, for example, when the event called the Crusade starts happens, this plays. And I'm gonna end it here. I mean, you know, I don't know whether I'm gonna get copyright strike for this. Again, if I do, I will understand it. But at the same time, what I want to point out is that this gives the event of the Crusade starting so much more weight. And I think we'll only be able to fully appreciate this once we see it in action. To compare this then with, you know, what we have in CK2, where essentially somebody shouts Deus Vult, this is so much more impressive. Like, this carries it so much more further to move this game from being a game to being you, just living your life in medieval Europe. The immersion and the role-playing that this will enable is so huge, and yet, you know, again, completely undervalued. I love that they did this dev there. It really adds a lot. Now, let's listen to this song, and I'm gonna keep it running in the background here if I can tone it down a bit. As we go with the video, we're just gonna keep listening to this. I hope that you can hear this. I think you can, right? This is a fairly long song. Again, you see the orchestra here, recorded in Budapest, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, indeed. The Budapest Scoring Orchestra. Very, 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 very cool. You can hear, are you hearing this? The old CK2 sounds as well. It's all in there. It's all essentially a mix-up, right? They developed it further. And while we listen to this, and I just want to essentially let this run. While we listen to this, I think it can't be overstated just how much I'm looking forward to actually hearing the soundtrack in the footage that we've seen so far, at least as far as I can remember. Even in the footage from the Guerrilla Collective digital convention, even there, I swear to God, they actually played a CK2 track. I'm pretty sure it was just a CK2 track. And I cannot overstate how excited I am to actually listen to all of these songs in-game Listen to this. They essentially remixed it, right? They entered with a common, with a familiar song, with a familiar sound. And now they add some more stuff, and this song, without a doubt, sounds more fitting as a general background song. But here we go. Look at this guy. What a god. Oh, I love that. I love watching musicians, seriously. It's great. How good does this sound? It doesn't sound overwhelming, it doesn't sound intrusive, but it makes you feel, it gives you this feeling of being involved with your character. And not just playing stats and modifiers. God, I love what they're doing here. And so many familiar, like kind of bait, I don't even know what it's called, but like where they bait you in, it's like the familiar sound and then it changes up. If you've listened to the Crusader Kings II soundtrack, then you will probably know what I mean, but I just can't articulate it. I stated this at the start of this diary, and I just can't articulate it just right, because I don't know enough about music. But very, very nice. Now let's go to the in-game music here. Just hear a bit of a sample. Look at this map as well. It's so in the background, but also it doesn't sound too backgroundy, if you know what I mean. Listen to this. Very, very nice. Now, to end this dev diary and to hope that I don't get copyright striked, let's go to the last step here, modding, because of course all of this cue, all of this mood stuff that is so heavily impacting CK3 now, because instead of just music playing in the background and it's essentially just a playlist, like, you know, Spotify playlist might as well exist like that, this one is now much more mood sensitive. And that is a huge step, but of course that means that you need to give those tools of mood sensitivity to the modders as well, or otherwise it would not really live up to its name, right? Imagine in CK3 vanilla you have all of these different cue musics, all of these, or cue songs, you have all of these mood songs that start, and then in any given mod that does music, well, they just sit down and essentially play a playlist, right? You can't go and do this step back, but instead they integrated this, and this is not very explanatory yet, but, you know, of course we need to see this in action whenever the game comes out, on the 1st of September, when the game comes out and modders can sit down and work on it. They enabled it as a modding tool to enable something as a mood, as a, essentially an event kind of sound. All of that stuff is enabled, and let's just take a look at this. Going to be very immersive. I love that they put in a song from Stellaris to showcase off declaring war in great difference here to, of course, where is it? There it is, to declaring war in how it's actually going to be. Going from Isengard to Stellaris, fighting the predecessors. But yeah, this is a really cool dev diary in my opinion, because this new layer that they added is something that we as players will always notice, but we can't quite explain what exactly is happening there. And them putting this much work into this, them putting this much work into explaining how they changed the soundscape between CK2 and CK3, I really loved it. I hope so did you. Let me know what you think about the music and the sound effects that we heard, because while, you know, of course, the mechanic of putting these sound effects to work in a much better way than they were in CK2, you can still disapprove of what the sounds actually sound like. Those are two different issues at the end of the day, right? But with that being said, I want to thank the members of the channel that are making videos such as this one possible, namely the Barons, Achilles, Know-How, Charlie, Eterna, Falling Phoenix, Rex Romanorum, Jacob, the Mosielago, Dan, Florian, MFA, Mitchell, Aaron, Stefan, and Snivell for always stumble over there. Then of course also the Counts, Lachlan, Kazen, Wombat, and Thomas, and Shifty, and last but not least the absolutely beautiful Dukes, Eric, Kiriana, Goodfield, Nathan, Jack, Kenneth, and Lex. So thank you all so much for supporting the channel, and let me know what you think about this in the comments. I'll see you later. Alligator.